Hi, good morning. It's Kathy, and I'm trying to give you a little bit of a video so you can see me because I miss you guys. Hopefully, you miss me a little bit. Anyway, so I'm trying to figure this out. We'll see if this works. Um, anyway, I wanted to follow up with a few things to finish up our race and ethnicity chapter, so I want to make sure I cover those and certainly start the discussion board then, and so you all can react. I would like you to also look further for information. So anyway, I wanted to cover a few things that have not been covered that I may have mentioned in the PowerPoint but didn't discuss yet in the discussion boards. And one is a difficult one, usually for people who are white or consider themselves white, and that is white privilege. And before everybody gets excited and says, "Oh my God, I'm not racist," or "I'm not," white privilege is been caught up in kind of making it a difficult thing to talk about for a lot of different reasons. One is racism is uncomfortable to talk about anyway, and especially when people are in uncomfortable situations where one has more information when you're in a crowd and where people of different ethnicities and different races are discussing it. So white privilege is a two-word term, and it packs kind of a double whammy for people that sometimes makes people push back, especially people who have not encountered personal racism as an experience in their lives. First of all, the word white, it creates discomfort because frankly, I, as a white person, am not used to being defined or described by my race. You don't say the white woman down the street or the white professor down the street, but you do say the person of color or the black individual or that person in a description of crime. Even on the news, you won't always hear white, you'll hear black, you'll hear Latino. And now we are better at saying white, but we are not used to, in my day-to-day life, having to describe the neighbor down the street or the person down the street in terms of their race, nor am I described in terms of my race. So that is one of the parts of that. The second word is the privilege, and that one gets so much pushback, especially in my group of even progressive friends, because I have conservative and different groups of social groups, but in my kind of close-knit group of more progressive individuals, the word privilege still like ekes at them, and where we say, um, that's not right, I don't feel privileged. Well, especially for uh, people who are rural white, very poor, and that sounds like a word to them that just doesn't belong to them and shouldn't be thrown on them. Like the word suggests that they've never struggled, that they've not been food insecure, that they've never been homeless. And that's just not true for all of them. So this defensiveness ends up derailing the conversation, which then means that race privilege and the discussion of it often has to start off, and I know this for a fact, with defining what it's not. That it's not trying to say that you're privileged in that typical way, that everything you have is undeserved or that you've never struggled. So if you don't start off with what it's not, then everybody turns off except the choir. So the people you want to reach really are checking out at that time. So white privilege is not the suggestion that white people have never struggled. Many white people don't enjoy the privileges that come with affluence, with more money and income and wealth, or have food security. So many don't experience the privilege that come with access, such as nearby hospitals or healthcare in general, or good educations because they are from poor rural areas where education is not paid for because it doesn't have the tax base to do it. So white privilege is not the assumption that everything a white person has and has accomplished is unearned. That would be wrong. Most white people who have achieved a high level of success worked extremely hard to get there. But instead, white privilege should be viewed as a built-in advantage. It's separate from one's income or effort, and yet later you will learn that it does contribute to that. So white privilege is something that you don't have to think about if you're white, that you do have to think about in any other race. So there's another way, because we talk about it so much in terms of white, black, that people of color. So I actually had a little bit of a different example in the Tree of Life shooting in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on October 27, 2018. That was a horrible anti-Semitic incident. A man, Robert Bowers, he was 46 years old, and he killed 11 members of that synagogue during a peaceful morning service. Injured 7 more. It was pretty awful. And he entered the building during the services with an assault weapon and 3 handguns. When they talked about it on the news, and they said, well, and he got past their security guard, and they talked about how he got past the security guard and his security guard, and it occurred to me that I, as a white Protestant and not someone who is Jewish, had never thought about a security guard in our churches. Our churches were open. Anyone could come, even where I practiced law for the last 30 some years. In the town you live in, Westminster, there's a church across from the courthouse, and it has a historical little chapel, and it's open all the time, and it has a sign outside like, welcome, come in, pray. And many times in high anxiety cases, we as attorneys would encourage them to just like go find some peace in this place. I never thought. It's something I've never had to think about. But people who are Jewish think about the security in their places of worship every day and have historically thought of that. What a privilege it is to have practiced a religion growing up that I didn't think of that. It never occurred to me. And it was the first time it occurred to me that, wow, there's a difference. And I had a privilege of not thinking about it. So it's the thing that I don't have to think about. My whiteness, I don't have to think about when I do things. So I hope that is something. Another thing that I want, and I would like some discussion on that. I'll put a discussion board up there for that. And also for the Plainview Project. This is something where we talk about race in law enforcement. Because in law enforcement, it's really important that we understand, because that leads also into mass incarceration, which is another issue in race. These are the last kind of 3 major issues I wanted to discuss: white privilege, law enforcement and racism, and mass incarceration, and how that's impacted both. You are impacted as someone of color because, frankly, we know that there are about 13% African Americans in our population, and yet they take, 40% of the U.S. prison population. So, yeah, and in many states it's even higher. It can be upwards of 70% African Americans incarcerated. So there are difficulties in mass incarceration, and what do we do about that? And are we prosecuting the right things? And sometimes are the crimes that we concentrate on aimed at certain people? And the one that's infamous from about 20 years ago that was outlawed by the Supreme Court about 10 years ago is the federal criminal guidelines for prison. And it gave a much higher incarceration time for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. Well, people who used powder cocaine were predominantly white and more affluent. The people who were using crack cocaine were of color or of a minority, and poor. It was a cheaper drug, and it was less uh, less sexy in the media, and so therefore, and because federal guidelines are mandatory, it gave people of color who may have been arrested with the same amount as cocaine, as powder cocaine, would get a much higher sentence. So people of color would get higher sentences, and people who were not, who were white, who got powder cocaine, would get much lesser sentences. So that was finally gotten rid of because it was so blatantly racist. But think about that, the institutional racism, because there was a lot of fights against it, even from the Department of Justice, who fought to keep it in the system and said that there was more dangerous, and it was this and it was that. But it was cocaine. It's cocaine. It's cocaine. You may concentrate it more. Well, you know, heroin can be stronger or less stronger, but we don't say, oh, well, that's no. So it's the drug itself that's supposed to kind of guide that. Um, they have other kinds of policies like stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is something that you heard a lot with prior Mayor Bloomberg, especially when he entered the presidential race, where people were saying, wait a minute, you're the guy who started stop and frisk. Now, did crime go down in New York? Yes, it did. And did he apologize later for it? Yes. But here's the problem. For years, stop and frisk went on. And even after he left office, he did support it. It was only more recently that he found out it wasn't as good, although he should have known, because only about 3% of all those persons who were stopped and frisked produced any evidence of a crime, which means 97% of the people who were stopped and frisked by officers were punished solely because they belonged to a group that the police believe statistically committed crimes at a higher rate. That should bother all of us. The Plainview Project is another thing, and that is really important. You can find it on plainviewproject.org. Please do find it on that. And that is a project that was begun by an attorney who was not fighting the First Amendment right to produce those, but thought that it was important for all of us to know if law enforcement were posting pretty publicly and pretty, blatantly racist and offensive, a lot of misogynist, also sexist comments, but a lot of racist comments. So she and the team worked on it, and they picked, I believe, 8 or 9 police departments, including York, Pennsylvania, which is just a little ways up the road from us, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, some big departments, some small departments, so a mix of those, and almost 25% of officers were found to have posted offensive and racist comments. It's really a pretty awful thing. I'm going to post a Trevor Noah little clip that he does on it, and I would like each of you to respond on that one. It's a really important one. So law enforcement, also in law enforcement, there are some programs besides stop and frisk that have been pretty bad for us. The broken window theory, which is that you stop the minor crimes and arrest immediately on the minor crimes. That way they don't grow to bigger crimes. But bigger crimes, the ones that take up more time and should take up more attention, we were still arresting for the little ones, the broken window ones. And does that really help in some neighborhoods? Because it was concentrated, frankly, in poor neighborhoods where minorities lived. So that's another one to look at. Okay, so I said no more than 15 minutes, so here it is. Hi, I'm glad to see you, but I can't see you. Please feel free, if you can upload videos of yourself, that would be great too. And I'll keep working on this because this is a work in progress. I'm learning, you're learning, hopefully we're still learning a little bit, but it's a lot easier for you. I know it's a really crazy world out there, and sometimes you just need to escape. And maybe in school you're not escaping realities of life, but you feel like you're contributing something, you're learning something, so that as you go out in the world after this whole craziness is partially over, you'll be better for the wear. Okay? Have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.